This time on Mystic Britain,
Are you a fan of human sacrifice?
I don't practice it myself.
Mary-Ann and I enter the murky world of Iron Age human sacrifice.
My, what a big knife that is, Katie.
Yes.
Using our razor-sharp investigative skills.
This is a human body, obviously. I spotted that straight away.
We'll be searching high and low.
You could go down first, just to check that it's big enough for me to get down.
And competing in an Iron Age cook-off.
It's going to be the best thing before sliced bread.
And Mary-Ann comes to a shocking conclusion.
I don't know why everyone's so against it.
What, human sacrifice?
Yeah, why not?
You're looking at me with a rather evil eye there.
The British Isles have a very long history. People have been living here for tens of thousands of years. And the further back you go, the more elusive and mysterious the lives of those ancient Britons appear to be.
Stonehenge. What's the point?
It's a bit like Lego.
Who were these ancient Britons? What did they believe? What was their world like?
Witches. Do you believe in witches?
I think I do.
As a talk show host, I should know how to ask a good question.
Where are we going to, Mary-Ann?
Clive, we are off on an adventure.
But answers are not really my strong suit.
Mummies or not mummies?
It's a tricky one, isn't it?
So I've roped in someone with more insight into the ancient world than I'll ever have. Anthropologist Mary-Ann Ohota.
Old bones,
Old
looking
stuff.
at the past, you know everything, don't you?
I like to ask a lot of questions about the past.
Together, we're going to unlock the mystic secrets of the ancient Britons.
I've decided to harness the forces of evil. Prepare to embrace the very odd indeed.
Right, I'm ready for all comers.
Human sacrifice, a brutal practice from ancient Asia, the Pacific, South America.
And Dorset.
According to Mary-Ann, in the Iron Age, this part of Britain was a hot spot for human sacrifice. Now we have some peculiar customs, like Morris dancing and cheese rolling. But ritually killing people just doesn't seem very, well, British. So what was going on in Iron Age Britain? To find out, Mary-Ann has dispatched me to one of the great centres of Iron Age civilization, Maiden Castle, Britain's largest Iron Age hill fort. If I can actually find it.
Do I go right or left? Let's try left.
I'm no expert, but this doesn't look much like a castle or even a fort. Perhaps their strategy was to exhaust attackers with a steep climb, or just get them thoroughly lost. If that's the case, it's certainly working on me.
I don't know which way to go. Some people seem to go right.
What I need is a different perspective. Okay, now that is impressive. A titanic fortress hewn from a natural hill by the hands of Iron Age Britons. What it lacks in battlements and stone walls, it makes up for in size, and in the size of these great big ditches, the protective ditches that stop people attacking up here, I suppose. A series of man-made banks and troughs up to 6 meters high defend a vast enclosure at the very top of the hill. Well, it is an enormous area up here. The sign down below says this is the size of 50 football pitches, and you could get at least that number of games up here. So what did people do up here? How did they live? And can it shed any light on whether Iron Age Britons practiced human sacrifice? What I need is an archaeologist. And what do you know?
Hello, Neil.
Hello, Clive.
Good to see you. Now, you're a great expert. What?
Well,
this
so they
place?
say.
Yeah.
Professor Neil Sharples has spent a fair chunk of his life investigating the world of Iron Age hill forts. Which is extremely helpful because all I can see is a very large field.
Well, for the visitor, though, you do have to use quite a lot of imagination.
I think if you have a look at this I brought with me, it'll give you a better impression of what it might have looked like in the past. So, there's that button there. Oh, look,
This is
isn't that lovely?
it's an Iron Age
Yes.
iPad. And we can see in this picture the more sharply declined the walls and the ramparts and so forth.
Yes, they would be much more pronounced than they are now. I mean, what we're seeing is 2,000 years of gradually decay and
So
accumulation.
it's smoothing out.
So smoothing out, yeah. They would be sharp, well-defined. They could even have had timber walkways along the top.
The site was first occupied in the Stone Age, around 6,000 years ago. But it was the Iron Age people who moved in around 600 BC that built the amazing fort we see today.
So how many people would have occupied this site?
Well, I've done some estimates now. I think about maybe 1,400 people, you know, that kind of number of people. That would be my best guess at the number of people that would be inside this. So a couple of hundred houses.
That sounds like a lot of people.
Well, it is.
So would it be better to describe this as a maiden township rather than a maiden castle?
Yes, no, I think this is a big settlement where people lived permanently, and it was as close to a town as you can get in prehistory.
Protected by the Great Walls, Neil believes the sheer size of the settlement and its dominating position in the landscape would have made the people up here major players in the area.
It's a sophisticated society. The amount of effort that goes into this, the amount of construction, the amount of organisation, you know, to arrange all the food, to feed the people that are coming, to build the ramparts, and to bring in the resources from miles away.
And the fertile land around here was well up to the task of supporting such a large community.
It's a relatively rich landscape, intensive production of grain. So wheat and barley, you know, there's huge quantities of that being grown in the fields around here. And that would be probably the main foodstuff.
Maiden Castle was a seat of power, rich in local resources and safe in the knowledge that it was the biggest, baddest hill fort around. This was the good life, Iron Age style. But according to Neil, there might have been a darker side to this good life. More than 80 years ago, a body was dug up here, and there was something very unusual about the burial.
So this is one of the trenches that was excavated in the 1930s. And at the bottom of this pit, there's a burial of a young male, probably 20 to 30, and he's sort of sitting up at the bottom of this pit.
When it was excavated, archaeologists penned a handy sketch of the find. It shows the body buried in a very odd position.
He's sitting in there. That's significant, is it? He's sitting rather than lying down?
I think he's arranged. I think it's a funny kind of arrangement. It's not something that we see very often.
Most of the admittedly tiny number of Iron Age burials we know about were laid in a fetal or crouching position, not sitting upright. Neil thinks the location of the body is also highly significant.
About 350 BC, they decided they were going to expand and make Maiden Castle the biggest hill fort in the region.
Yeah.
But there's a huge ditch right in front of us. You wouldn't believe it now because it just looks like
No, you
flat
can't see it.
ground.
Yeah.
And it's actually 6 meters deep. There's this massive V-shaped ditch there.
Yeah.
And that was filled in, and then they built this new rampart along here.
And that new rampart is exactly where they buried the body.
Clearly, this is some kind of deliberate sacrifice to mark the construction of this new event, this expansion of the hill fort.
But you think that this could be a sacrifice, a human sacrifice? Can you tell how this guy died?
No, sadly, there's no evidence for that. You could do a lot of things to a body without making any mark on the skeleton.
So this could have been a sacrifice to mark the fort's expansion, like the mayor laying the cornerstone of a new building project, but with added supernatural oomph. Was it to persuade the gods to make it stronger, or to protect from enemy attack? It's plausible, I suppose, but speaking as a lawyer, the evidence is highly circumstantial. And I've got an equally plausible explanation.
He was there at this time of the year. The wind was blowing as it's getting up now, and he just died of cold.
The evidence here is as thin as my coat. And I need to get off this exposed hillside before I become another mysterious Maiden Castle body. I have to say, I'm not yet convinced. Marianne?
Ah, but there's more, Clive. There's something else special about that burial. The fact that it's there at all. Despite an Iron Age population of over 1 million, archaeologists have found just a handful of complete burials. So what happened to all the other bodies? Well, there is one obvious explanation. They all went up in smoke.
If you died in southern Britain in the Iron Age, you might expect that your body is placed on a glorious cremation pyre like this one.
Unfortunately, there isn't much evidence for cremation in the Middle Iron Age. But then there wouldn't be, as the evidence literally turns to ash. So if you weren't burned, what happened to you?
The archaeologists reckon that you were probably excarnated, which is where the body is left out in the open air, and then your flesh rots away or it's picked clean by birds and animals, and then your bones may be collected up, but more likely they're just left to scatter to the four winds. There will be no archaeological evidence that you ever walked the earth.
So most Iron Age bodies probably rotted away, or were eaten by animals, or both. Nice. Why should we care about all this in terms of human sacrifice? Well, it strongly suggests that by burying the body at Maiden Castle, the people there were sending a message. This death is special.
Okay, Marianne, I can see this does add weight to the argument. But it's still a jolly big leap from a dodgy burial to human sacrifice. What I need is real evidence on a real body.
OK, let's pop a lab coat on.
I'll just take...
I've come to Bournemouth University to meet archaeologist Paul Cheetham. And luckily, I've brought my keen powers of observation to the party.
Well, this is a human body, obviously. I spotted that straight away.
Yes, this is a body that came from our site at Winterbourne, Kingston.
In 2010, Paul and his team were excavating an Iron Age farmstead about 13 miles from Maiden Castle when they discovered a body with some distinctive and gruesome marks.
When it was looked at very closely, we realised that there was a cut mark on the neck. If we look at the back here, we can see just there a very tiny nick, which suggests that somebody has slashed down with a blade, gone to the back of the neck there.
Right. So you're suggesting that as a cause of death?
It's likely that, unfortunately, this individual, in their early 20s, was the victim of basically either sacrifice or murder.
Now, this is more convincing. But can we tell the difference between murder and ritual sacrifice? Well, once again, the fact that it's a burial at all marks it out as special. But that's not the only odd thing about it.
This particular body was placed in a pit, but in a very, very unusual way. It was laid on top of a series of animal bones. And they put the bones out and they laid them out in what was basically a sort of a rough anatomical position for an animal. They put a skull at one head and they had hip bones and long bones in between. It was a bit of a mix of cow and horse and a bit of dog.
So you
and
mixed up several jigsaws and put them together?
And there's more. Paul found 3 other very similar pits at the farmstead. They also contained human remains. Taken together, they suggest there was a pattern to these deaths.
When we started to date these burials, we find that about every 20 years, so every generation, one of these special events happens with the pits. It could be some sort of cyclic event that had to happen every so often to renew their relationship with the gods or with nature, or because maybe things had gone down, bad harvests, and they just felt that there was something that they had to do to increase fertility.
Gosh, that must have been a pretty bad harvest. You've got to put a human in.
Paul's evidence makes a compelling case for human sacrifice, but the motive for something that seems so momentous remains a little vague. He suggests it could be related to the harvest. So my challenge to you, Marianne, is, can you prove it?
Clive, I accept your challenge, because I know a site that might be able to nail that connection.
This is Danebury Hill Fort in Hampshire. It dates to around the same time as Meghan Castle. It's about 2,500 years old. And when it was at its peak, it was home to about 300 people.
Like Meghan Castle, today it mostly looks like a collection of man-made mounds on a big hill. And while it may be smaller than Meghan Castle, we know far more about the people who lived here and what they got up to, thanks largely to this man, Sir Barry Cunliffe. He's forgotten more about the Iron Age than most of us will ever know, so pay attention, Clive.
This place is super impressive. Given that it's, 2,500 years old, it's in great nick, isn't it? You can really get a sense of the scale of it.
Yes, not much has eroded here. The ramparts that we're seeing going all the way around here are more or less as large as they were originally.
Nothing is left of the original Iron Age buildings, and our graphics budget isn't big enough for a glorious photo-real recreation. We need something a little more low-tech.
Danebury and Lego. All my dreams come true.
The local museum used the evidence from Barry's digs to commission this brilliant model.
When you're there, you're standing in a big grassy space on the top of a windswept hillside, but this helps you realise that actually it was, the heart of a thriving community with houses and pigs and goats and kids running around.
The Lego block village is a pretty close reconstruction, except maybe a bit more, well, blocky. Just like at Meghan Castle, the people of Danebury lived in sturdy roundhouses, made from coppice timber, with a hearth at the centre. But the houses weren't the most important buildings here.
Along most of the roads, there were these ranges of above-ground grain storage buildings, row upon row of them, where the consumption grain was stored.
So this is where you'd keep your grain to feed the animals, to mill down for flour to make your bread, to brew to make beer, all that stuff?
Yes, the grain you needed for everyday use. They were literally everywhere.
But it's not the main grain stores I'm interested in. Barry has been saving the best for last.
Lovely, lovely.
He's given me red blocks to play with. These represent the more than 2,000 covered pits that Barry and his team found dug into the ground. These pits were used for storing next year's seed grain. Nothing was more vital to the long-term survival of the community. And here, Clive, is what you've been waiting for. Because in some cases, once the pits had served their purpose, they put something else in them.
Some of the bodies we found are absolutely entire. One actually has the hands tied across the body. Then the pit was filled in.
25 complete bodies were found in the pits at Danebury. Most were young men. Some were tied up. Some weren't. Some were healthy. Others showed signs of disease and disability. and one was downright horrifying.
We found a sort of bath-shaped pit, so a rather unusual pit. Right in the centre was this human pelvis, just by itself, on the bottom of the pit.
Well, I can immediately see that this is the top of your femur, the leg bone, but the rest of it's missing.
Fits in there, that's it. And this one fitted in there, yeah.
And that isn't supposed to be like that.
No.
There's supposed to be a leg attached to that.
They've chopped the legs off here, at the top of the femurs, and then they've slashed through the middle of the body, through the soft part, and through the sacral vertebra, and taken out the pelvis area of this body and just put it on the bottom of a pit.
That is so violent.
They didn't just neatly carve the top of the body off, they hacked the top of the body off.
Wow. Do we know whether he was alive when this happened to him, or he was dead? I mean, how can you tell?
No, all we can tell is that it was a fresh body. He might have been newly dead, he might have been alive. But one would hope that they might have killed him before they chopped him up, but we don't know.
Whatever happened here 2,500 years ago, the Lego men aren't telling. Barry thinks the answer is tied to the original contents of the pits. Seed grain. Lose your seed grain and you have nothing to plant for next year's harvest. Your whole society could collapse. So Barry believes human sacrifices were part of an elaborate Iron Age deal with their gods.
They're putting their seed grain, which is so vitally important to the life of the community, they're putting it in the realms of the gods of the underground. And they're saying to the gods, here's our livelihood. Protect it for us during the year, and we will say thank you to you in some way if it is fresh when we take it out and sow it and it's fertile.
By some way, he means with a human sacrifice. You have to admit, it does send a strong message.
These aren't just sort of casual one-offs. It's part of a pattern of behaviour that we can trace through time and throughout the fort.
In my book, this is unequivocally human sacrifice, and it's all connected to grain and survival. The basic idea seems brutally simple. To get something, like enough food to avoid starvation, you have to give something. And the gift of choice seems to have been a human life. But there's something about this whole argument that still doesn't quite add up for me.
I can well imagine that Iron Age people did do rituals and had special practices in the fields to protect them, and the evidence just simply hasn't survived archaeologically. But what I don't understand is why is there such a ritual focus on the grain pits, where the storage is? Because surely by that point, the grain is safe.
As I can't ask an Iron Age farmer directly, I've come to talk to his modern equivalent, grain farmer Adrian Dixon, to see if he can shed some light on this.
Here is a crop of harvested wheat.
So this is going to turn into flour to make bread and cake and stuff like that? Can I pick some up?
By all means,
It smells absolutely amazing.
It turns out that keeping the grain in good condition is as hard today as it was 2,000 years ago.
The farmer's worst enemy is the weather, and if it's wet, you've got to dry it quickly, get the moisture out of it, because if you were to put this in here wet and not aerated, it would, within 24 hours, it would heat up, literally get red hot. It is a living entity, and you've got to put it into a state of dormancy and preserve it.
To pull that off, Adrian's grain store is packed with modern technology.
So this barn is designed to blow warm air through the grain so it doesn't get all soggy and start fermenting, rotting.
Correct, absolutely. This particular design, it's a ventilated floor, big fans, air will trickle up through the crop, cool it slowly, but as long as you've got airflow moving through it, even though it's a gradual process, it won't deteriorate.
Imagine what a challenge it would have been for Iron Age farmers. The grain pits were their equivalent of Adrian's technology, cool, dark and carved into the rock. And it seems to have worked pretty well. But bear in mind the survival of your entire community depended on it. And in that situation, I guess sacrificing someone to avoid starvation wouldn't have seemed quite so crazy.
And I'm assuming you don't make human or animal sacrifices to the gods to ensure your bountiful harvest?
We don't, no. But we may start trying to do that if things go seriously wrong.
I don't think I'd appreciated how many different ways storing grain can go wrong. Planting and harvesting it is just the start. If you want to have seed corn that's good enough to grow the following year so you've got something to eat, you need to work really hard. It makes total sense to me now that the place where you really want to appease those gods is where you store your grain.
OK, it's starting to look more and more like Meghan was right. Sacrificing humans may have been a great British pastime 2,500 years ago. We have bodies, we have method, we have a motive of sorts. But it's all brutal and rather extreme. Were Iron Age Britons really so desperate? I'd like to get a sense of what their life was like that doesn't involve tiny plastic men. Arrgh. Jackie Wood is an experimental archaeologist and writer who spends her time working out how our ancient ancestors lived.
I'll settle down next to you if I may.
Right.
Obviously, I'm hoping to steer her towards the food side of things rather than human sacrifice.
This is how it works. You've got a fire in the middle of the room.
Yep.
And the smoke just escapes through
Yep.
the roof. No chimney or anything unnecessary like that.
No.
You've got foodstuffs laid out for me to look at.
We're going to make an Iron Age snack.
Right.
Right.
Jackie's agreed to treat me to an authentic Iron Age breakfast using some of their precious grain.
What would be quite nice is if we make some bread and we'll make some butter to put on the bread and we've got a bit of honey to go with it.
So bread, butter and honey?
Yeah.
Lovely.
When Jackie says we are going to make bread, it turns out she means I am.
So we need you to grind a little bit of grain for us.
Oh, right.
So you get a handful of the grain.
Yeah.
Right.
So I'm just turning like that. Oh, I see.
right.
Yeah.
And the flour should start to come out of the bottom there.
Yes, it is. Yes. And have I done enough there for a sandwich?
Well, I think not, really.
I'm clearly not cut out for this Iron Age lark. Just keep smiling, Clive. Luckily, Jackie suspected as much and has some flour she made earlier on standby. Just as well I could have been at it all day.
In here, we've got some butter and flour.
Yeah.
And put a bit of salt in.
So you want to mix this up?
Yeah, so mix it up as much as you can. And we'll put a little bit of honey in. That'll help the yeast.
Mm-hmm. This is going to be fantastic. It's going to be the best thing before sliced bread.
Ever.
Yeah.
And no civilized person should have bread without butter. But just like everything else in the Iron Age, making it takes time and effort.
Oh, there's a lot to do, isn't there, just for a simple snack? This was just
this
Iron Age 11s, and it's turning into a day's work. You've
So
got
we've just
cream
got
in there.
cream in there.
We're going to turn this into butter.
Turn that
I'm
into
going to turn it into
Yeah,
butter.
you're going to turn that into butter.
OK.
You can do that, or you can just stir it round.
Just stir like that.
As it turns out, it didn't take as long as I thought. It took much longer.
You know, I have a romantic notion that I'd really like to live in these simpler times, but 10 minutes with you getting me to do it. And I'm beginning to change my mind. It's definitely thickening.
There you go. Shall I have a go? You're all right.
Well, as you can see, it's a pretty straightforward process, requiring only about 9 hours' work for a scraping of butter. Well, better late than never.
Terrible puns aside, I'm beginning to see just how much effort Iron Age people had to put into making even the simplest of meals. And just how central grain was to their lives. After quite literally hours of slaving over a hot fire, hands up, I'm talking about Jackie there, not me, I'm more than ready to see if this meal was really worth sacrificing a human life for.
Right, so these rolls, as we've made them, are they ready, do you think?
They're ready.
Yes.
Let's go for it.
Smells like bread. I'll put half it down. Oh, and this is the
Some
batter we've
butter.
made. I think I might... OK. There we are. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
So it's not the most elegant bread roll I've ever made. So we have a go at it.
Yep. That's good, isn't it?
Tastes almost like bread and butter.
Well, that trip back in time has taught me something absolutely vital. Don't give up the day job. What is obvious is that grain was a very big deal in the Iron Age. It was their staple food. If a crop failed, they faced starvation. So I can see in those circumstances that securing the seed grain is a powerful motive to do whatever you thought would keep the gods happy. Marianne may have been right all along.
It's funny, isn't it? Because you look at these vast hills that have been shaped and modified by human hands.
Yeah.
And possibly what they were all about was the control of tiny little barley grains and wheat grains. I mean, it's about control of resources. It's about making sure that the people are fed.
But what led people to believe that human sacrifice might in any way help?
Your guess is as good as mine, is as good as any experts, because there you're kind of delving into the, you know, the human heart. Why do we do any of the weird things that humans do? You know, beseech the gods to look after us. I know what we'll do is we'll sacrifice a human because a human life is very special and important.
Yeah.
Now, that might be partly that our modern sensibilities say human lives are very special and important, but actually back in the Iron Age, maybe it's not as valuable. And the truth is, we just don't know because the archaeology can't preserve people's intentions.
So, case solved then. Iron Age Britons did practice human sacrifice, and it was all about farming and avoiding famine. Wouldn't it be nice if it were that simple? But it never is. 20 years ago, evidence of ancient human sacrifice turned up not in a grain pit, but in a Gloucestershire cave.
So this is a cave. It just doesn't look like caving country.
No, well, this is solid limestone we're on. It's actually flat.
Yes.
And they're not caves like, you know, you walk into. They're formed as underground caverns underneath the limestone here.
Archaeologist Mark Horton has been visiting the site for nearly 2 decades.
Okay, you down?
Yeah, I'm down. I don't
Sound?
to get much deeper than this. Oh, right.
Okay, so climb.
Oh, this is a proper cave entrance.
There is the entrance.
Yeah.
We can send you down if you want.
Well, actually, I don't want. In fact, I'm struggling to think of anything I want less.
Well, don't take this unkindly. Is there a way you could go down first, just to check that it's big enough for me to get down?
Well, it is a little narrow in places.
Well, you wouldn't want to go down there, would you?
Yeah, that's what they all do.
Oh, for goodness sake. Mark, the thing is, as the years go by,
Yes.
are there some holes you can get in and out of? Is it more difficult? Now?
Well, yes, it is. I mean, I was there 4 years ago and I went straight in and out.
Yes.
It was a little bit more difficult this time.
Age and pies, the Achilles heel of great archaeologists. And, of course, TV presenters.
So was this cave discovered by a professional archaeologist or an explorer, or did the people just stumble on it?
I was actually at the university, rung up by the police. So these nutters have come in with bags of bones that they've been clearing out of this cave.
Yeah.
So I went along to a police station, they had all these bones laid out. I said, well, they're probably ancient, so they're probably an archaeological deposit. So I just took them home, got in touch with the cavers, who said, oh, we're clearing the cave out.
Yeah.
And so every Friday night, I'd have a bag with skulls left on my doorstep.
What really caught Mark's attention, other than finding a carrier bag full of bones on his doorstep, was that a large number were human, and he found signs of violent death.
How many? What's the sort of quantity of bones you've got?
Well, we've got several thousand of them, and we think we've got at least 12 individuals.
Right.
Humans.
So would these have come here over a period of time, over dozens of years, hundreds of years, or what?
Well, we've radiocarbon dated quite a lot of the bones already, and every single one of them turns out to have exactly the same date. It took place over a very short period of time, and maybe one single moment. It might have just all happened in a day.
So one single event when there's some ceremony or some event, people dying, people being sacrificed. What's the picture I've got of this?
That's kind of what might be happening. There might have been some massive event in which people were being sacrificed and their carcasses were being thrown down as offerings to the gods.
Mass sacrifice. Now, that is very different to everything we've seen so far from the Iron Age. What could possibly have motivated this? The carbon dating places the bones around 2,000 years ago, which is a significant period in British history. It marks the start of the Roman invasion of Britain. Is it possible these human offerings were a desperate attempt to defeat the invaders? And Mark's got even more chilling evidence. This wasn't just mass human sacrifice. It was, and I can't believe I'm saying this, even more horrific. He believes the locals decided to supercharge their human sacrifice. And Mark's brought me to a nearby backyard to show.
There is evidence that could confirm this grim suspicion. At the Verulamium Museum in St Albans, they hold bodies from the burial site of an Iron Age chieftain who died around the same time as the mass sacrifices in Gloucestershire.
But it's not the chief that I'm here to see. It's the 3 women who were buried with him.
Archaeologist Simon West believes the women's bones may show signs of human sacrifice. Or at least what's left of them do.
OK. They seem quite small for human bones, human bodies.
Unfortunately, the ground is so acidic that the survival rate of the bones is, well, the worst one is only 25% of the body.
Ah, OK.
So we haven't got a lot of them.
With so little left, it's hard to be absolutely certain that these poor women were the victims of human sacrifice. But there are other similarities with bodies from other sites, because all 3 had health or disability issues.
This one has a diagnosis of tuberculosis. This one does have an interesting pathology, and that's the styloid process, which is a bone underneath the ear. It's abnormally long.
And what would that do to you?
Well, they sort of connect to the tongue and the throat, so you've got a very sore face and you have problems swallowing.
So we have 4 potential human sacrifice sites. Maiden Castle, St Albans, Danebury, and Gloucestershire. And in 3 of them, it seems that at least some of the victims were chosen because of a debilitating illness or disease.
What we don't know is whether those disabilities or deformities mark them out as different in a good way, special and therefore extra potent to give to the gods, or whether those disabilities or deformities marked them out as odd or wrong, as the people saw it, and so they ended up being handy scapegoats.
When the Romans arrived in Britain, they banned human sacrifice, which in itself is a big clue that it really was going on here. As far as they were concerned, it was a barbaric practice that needed stamping out. Job done, you'd think. An ancient and very grisly belief finally quashed. But not quite.
Towards the end of the 4th century, Roman rule started to break down. So what happened then?
Well, here in a museum storeroom at the Hampshire Cultural Trust, there's clear evidence that even after a gap of several hundred years, human sacrifice turned out to be a hard habit for us Brits to break.
He's probably in his later 40s onwards. He's a late Roman skeleton, so he's in a cemetery that was in existence from about 350 to the end of the Roman period.
Yeah.
And he's got some quite interesting evidence for this possible live human sacrifice.
Wow, let's cut straight to the chase. Live human sacrifice. So we're talking about someone being ritually killed?
I believe so, yeah. I think the evidence points that way. There's a very, very fine cut mark
look there.
that runs right across the front of this vertebra. So
that's a cut mark here somewhere?
Yeah, this would have been produced by a blade being drawn across the bone. So this is not like a chopping blow. So this is presumably a knife or other implement being drawn across the front of the neck.
So this man had his throat slit.
So far, so violent. But what marks this man out as being something more than a murder victim is what else was done to him.
He was decapitated, his head was completely removed.
Yeah.
But that was done with chopping blows with an implement from the back of the neck.
So are we talking overkill? That idea where, because you're doing something for ritual purposes, you're not just trying to kill someone, you're trying to kill someone in a particularly theatrical way that pleases the gods or pleases the crowd or whatever.
It may have
you do
been
it loads of different ways.
Exactly, because there are multiple chop marks and cut marks on this individual.
The most famous examples of overkill are found in the numerous bog bodies from across northern Europe, most of which date back to the Iron Age. Just like our chap in Hampshire, they show clear evidence of a ritualised death, sometimes called overkill. And if you think the Hampshire man's wounds are overkill, wait till you see the knife that might have caused them.
I can actually show you a modern reconstruction of one of these blades.
My, what a big knife that is, Katie.
Yes, so this is a specific Roman-type cleaver. It's very, very sharp.
Okay.
Examples have been found quite a lot of places. And it's been suggested that, unlike a modern cleaver, which is basically just designed as a chopping weapon, that these Roman cleavers could be used as a dual-purpose tool. So they would be able to chop, but they'd also be able to precisely slice.
So we have the victim, we have the weapon, but the motive, that remains elusive.
Yeah, I think the motive is something we may never completely be able to tease apart.
Lost in the mists of time.
The uncomfortable truth of all this is that we Brits probably did our fair share of sacrificing humans over hundreds of years. And our belief in it was so strong that not even a so-called civilizing force, aka the Romans, stopped it entirely. Now here's a thought. If it resurfaced once, could it happen again?
I don't know why everyone's so against it.
What, human sacrifice?
Yeah, why not?
Well, you're looking at me with a rather evil eye there. Well, I can think there are obvious reasons why we're against human sacrifice. It's very unkind to the sacrificed person. And any evidence...
Possibly.
If it's just a child or a Vestal Virgin or the equivalent, just be chosen for your purity or availability or the fact you're too small to fight back.
Yeah, that's bad. OK, so we can, like, define our terms.
Yeah.
Some sacrifice, possibly OK. The young and the vulnerable, they're not allowed.
You're forcing the issue here. I'm not saying some of it's OK.
Do you think you'd make a good human sacrifice victim?
Well, I'm not volunteering. I think it may be a bit like warfare. It's the old men who decide who should be sacrificed, and it's the young people who go to an early grave.
I can kind of see you cast as the high priest saying,
Thank you very much.
a human sacrifice is necessary.
And I'll have to choose you. It'll be you, I'm afraid.
adventure.
But answers are not really my strong suit.
Mummies or not mummies?
It's a tricky one, isn't it?
So I've roped in someone with more insight into the ancient world than I'll ever have. Anthropologist Mary Ann Ohota.
Old bones,
Old
looking
stuff.
at the past, you know everything, don't you?
I like to ask a lot of questions about the past.
Together, we're going to unlock the mystic secrets of the ancient Britons.
I've decided to harness the forces of evil. Prepare to embrace the very odd indeed.
Right, I'm ready for all comers.
Human sacrifice, a brutal practice from ancient Asia, the Pacific, South America.
And Dorset.
According to Mary Ann, in the Iron Age, this part of Britain was a hot spot for human sacrifice. Now we have some peculiar customs, like Morris dancing and cheese rolling. But ritually killing people just doesn't seem very, well, British. So what was going on in Iron Age